The gravel crunched like bones beneath his tires. Richard Holloway slammed the brakes. Gone were the golden wheat fields, replaced by a glass and steel hotel, windows glaring like 1,000 eyes. 1 month. That's all it took to erase 4 generations. A construction worker approached. Voice low. "You shouldn't be here." Behind him, a security camera pivoted slowly. Karen Reynolds' name glared from the sign. They'd forged his family's death certificate. Tonight, he'd burn their lies to ash. I pulled over, heart hammering. The air felt heavier, as if the land itself sensed the betrayal. Our once sprawling wheat fields had vanished beneath manicured lawns, bright yellow construction barriers, and an enormous parking lot. A sign towered over it all, Willowbrook Community Development. My throat felt tight, a mix of shock and anger swirling in my gut. 1 month. That was all I'd been gone, off consulting overseas, desperately trying to secure some financial stability for my family. Now our golden fields were rubble and rebar. My SUV idled at the roadside, dust settling around it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Richard, emergency. Call me a sap." I stared at the message but couldn't tear my eyes away from the hotel's mirrored windows, each pane gleaming like 1,000 watchful eyes. A construction worker noticed me and approached. His expression flickered with concern. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Not can't, shouldn't, like a warning. I stepped out, my legs almost giving way. "This is my family's land. Richard Holloway. We never sold." My voice shook despite the anger simmering in my chest. He shifted on his feet, eyes darting towards security cameras perched along the site. Sorry man, just following orders." My boots ground into the soil that once nourished us for generations. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. Mom's voice haunted me. "We're Holloways. We don't quit." But the farm had. Each step felt like walking over a grave. My grandfather's, my father's, all those who fought to keep this land alive. Karen Reynolds' name glared at me from a project sign. My throat tightened like a noose. Karen, of course. The same woman who sent endless letters about our unkempt fences, with her name always looped in that smug signature. Now she had stamped it across a monstrosity, a towering structure of concrete and glass, devouring my family's legacy. I glanced at a nearby table stacked with permits and zoning documents, words like community improvement and environmental compliance jumping out. My stomach churned. This was too orchestrated to be legal, or at least too underhanded to be right. I turned away, an acid taste in my mouth. If I didn't get answers now, I'd never sleep. But Sarah's text glowed on the phone screen, a silent siren calling me back to reality. We'd fight this, I told myself. The land might look dead, but a Holloway never truly quits. Yes, I thought. I'd burn their paperwork empire to the ground if that's what it took. The coffee shop in town was nearly empty. I found a corner table, cradling a steaming cup I barely tasted. My laptop glowed with research windows, property lines, zoning regulations, old farmland records. My pen scratched across a notepad, each question leading to 10 more. A waitress approached, refilling my coffee. "Rough day?" I forced a thin smile, just getting started, and it was true. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how meticulously Karen and her cronies had orchestrated the takeover. Whispered deals, fast-tracked permits, and an HOA board all too eager to approve. A single name kept popping up, Karen Reynolds, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, the same Karen who once threatened us with a fine if we didn't trim the hedges. My phone buzzed again. "Sarah." I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Richard," she said, "it's worse than we thought. We received an official notice. They claim the land's under some new rezoning for community development." I exhaled sharply, pen tapping the table. "I'll handle it. Tell me everything when I get home." The ride back felt surreal. My thoughts flitted to the day we spread my grandfather's ashes over these fields. He believed in the sanctity of this farm. "Knowledge is your best weapon," he'd say, showing me old property documents he'd guarded like treasure. Now it was time to use them. Sunlight slanted through the barn's wooden slats, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts of the past. I rummaged through a battered file cabinet, pulling out a stack of yellowed deeds and maps. My grandfather's careful, slanting script covered the margins, each note a clue to how he'd safeguarded our property. The hotel wasn't a building. It was a taunt, a concrete middle finger to my family. Every step toward it crushed soil that had nourished us for a century. My boots left cracks in the earth, or maybe those were the cracks in my resolve. One by one, I laid the documents across an old workbench. Hand-drawn surveys from the 1950s, inheritance records, boundary lines meticulously annotated. A single phrase on one map caught my eye. Article 7.3, Emergency Reclamation. It was circled in red. Why? My heart thumped. My grandfather had circled it, likely for a reason. A noise outside made me freeze. Peering through a narrow window, I saw a white SUV with HOA stickers roll up. Karen Reynolds herself stepped out, clipboard in hand, expensive heels sinking into the damp earth. She swept her gaze over the farm like she owned the world. My phone vibrated with a text from Marcus, our lawyer, found something interesting. Call me a sap, but I stayed hidden, not wanting to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing me. She took notes, snapped a few photos, then left, dust trailing behind her car. I slid the barn door open, stepping out into the late afternoon sun. The land felt charged, every blade of grass humming with the weight of generations. Karen thought she could seize what wasn't hers. She had no idea the storm that was brewing. That night, I spread the documents across our kitchen table. Sarah sat beside me, eyes scanning lines of script written before either of us was born. Marcus's voice crackled over the phone as we explained each discovery. These documents prove continuous farm use for decades, I said, tapping a set of photographs with year-stamped corners. No one abandoned anything. There's no legal basis for them to claim it was underused land. Keep going, Marcus encouraged. Find every shred of evidence. Paper trail is everything here. My gaze flicked to the sealed envelope we'd unearthed in the barn, a red wax seal with our family's initial. We hadn't opened it yet. Something in me wanted to savor the possibility it held, like a final ace up my grandfather's sleeve. Sarah placed a comforting hand on my arm. We'll get through this. We have to. The phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Some secrets are better left buried. My pulse quickened. Threats? Now? Fine. Let them come. Before bed, I found myself alone, staring at the farmland from our porch. The distant skeleton of the hotel glowed under floodlights, an ugly intrusion on the horizon. I pictured my grandfather leaning against the railing, old straw hat in hand, telling me how the land speaks if you listen. Right now, all I heard was its rage. Morning came with a crisp breeze, bringing a visitor I hadn't seen in years, Mr. Henderson, our elderly neighbor. His hands trembled as he slid a manila envelope across our kitchen counter. You'll want to see this, he whispered, eyes flitting about like someone might be listening. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes mapping a twisted history of Karen Reynolds. She'd allegedly orchestrated small-scale land grabs for years under the guise of community improvement, manipulative tactics, backdoor deals. She's been doing this for so long, Mr. Henderson said, voice shaking. Nobody dared to fight her. My jaw clenched. Well, that's about to change. Sarah began scanning the documents into our laptop. I studied an aerial photo from the late 90s, red lines marking boundary shifts that conveniently expanded HOA property. Legal? Maybe, but suspicious as hell. Mr. Henderson's voice dropped to a near whisper. People in the community are scared of her. She knows how to make life miserable if you cross her. We won't cross her, I said softly. We'll expose her. A young woman passed by our window, glancing in nervously. I recognized her from a recent HOA meeting. She seemed anxious, like she wanted to approach but lost her nerve. She hurried away before I could react. Sarah raised an eyebrow. She's been lurking around for days. We spent the next hour piecing together Karen's pattern, subtle rezoning, forged community votes, intimidation tactics. One document, an old letter from Karen to the county council, outlined beautification projects that conveniently benefited her relative's construction business. The puzzle was forming. My phone rang. Another unknown number. Sarah answered, brows furrowed. She hung up, her voice subdued. Someone wants to meet you. Says they have inside information on Karen's past projects. Mr. Henderson's eyes sparkled with hope. Seems like the truth's finally coming out. The air felt electric. Every new piece of evidence was a bullet loaded into a gun. Soon we'd have the firepower to fight, but we had to move carefully. Karen would strike back the moment she sensed real danger. Marcus arrived the next day, sleeves rolled up, tie askew, a lawyer on a mission. Together we pored over old property maps, layering them across the kitchen table until every inch was covered. Sarah served us coffee, her eyes scanning the pages for any clue we might have missed. These boundary lines are inconsistent. Marcus said, tracing a finger along the edges of one survey. They changed over the years in ways that don't match official records. I frowned. But if those changes weren't legal, Marcus grinned, then the HOA has no case. He handed me a stack of newly obtained county records. Buried in them were letters of complaint from multiple families who'd been pressured to sell or abandon land. The pattern was disturbingly clear. Karen's empire grew by exploiting fear and confusion, forging alliances with local officials who owed her favors. My phone chimed. The local historical society had replied to one of Marcus's inquiries. They mentioned that certain farmland in Willowbrook was protected by old trust agreements. Could that be tied to the Article 7.3 emergency reclamation note my grandfather circled? We couldn't act too soon. One wrong move, and Karen would bury us in counter lawsuits. We needed the final puzzle piece, a smoking gun that proved the hotel's construction was illegal. Sarah opened a cardboard box from the attic. Inside were more old documents, some referencing land trusts from the 1940s. Handwritten lines detailing how the farm was never to be subdivided without explicit family consent. Marcus's eyes brightened. You realize what this means, right? If your grandfather placed the land in a trust that predates the HOA charter, they never had the authority to rezone it. My heart pounded. Then what Karen did is worthless. He nodded. Exactly. Outside, the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the battered remains of our wheat fields in gold. The monstrous hotel silhouette taunted us. But now we had hope. They'd underestimated a family with generations of meticulous record-keeping. The community center was packed to the brim, the air thick with tension. Rows of folding chairs faced a long wooden table where the HOA board sat. Cameras from the local news station rolled discreetly in the corners. Word had gotten out that the Holloways were challenging the big shots. Karen perched at the center, designer suit pressed to perfection, hair styled into a helmet of control. She gave the room a tight-lipped smile, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. This wasn't going to be one of her usual steamroll sessions. I stood, documents clutched under my arm, scanning the crowd. Martha Thompson, a fair-minded neighbor, offered me a small nod of encouragement from the back row. It was enough. Clearing my throat, I began. Thank you all for coming. I'm here to address the hotel development on my family's farmland. Karen leaned forward, voice sugary. Mr. Holloway, we understand your concerns, but... I held up a stack of old property maps. I'm not finished. A hush fell over the room. Don't get rattled, I told myself. But to fight a dragon, you need more than evidence. You need a sword. My sword was in these documents. One by one, I presented the facts, land trust agreements from 1940 onward, boundary surveys that contradicted the HOA's rezoning claims, even old photographs of harvests from every single decade. Continuity of use. No question about it. Martha Thompson took the microphone. These are legitimate records, she said, eyes scanning the pages. Why weren't they reviewed before construction? Karen's mask cracked. They must be outdated. Our records show, Marcus stepped in, referencing official county filings that matched our documents. Karen had nowhere to hide. Then I dropped the bombshell, a private environmental impact assessment I'd commissioned. I spread the pages out for all to see. Drainage violations, potential water contamination. The hotel construction had trampled on county environmental guidelines left and right. Gasps echoed across the room. You can't just take land, I said, voice quieter but every bit as firm. This isn't about blocking community progress. It's about respecting property rights and protecting the environment. Justin, a younger board member, murmured, We need time to review this. Karen's composure melted bit by bit. She tried to interject, but the avalanche of data drowned her out. By the meeting's end, the crowd was buzzing with alarm and curiosity. Some stared at Karen with new suspicion. Others pored over the documents, whispering about shady deals. I left the podium, heart pounding. Outside, the sunset glowed red, as though the sky sensed the battle was just starting. Karen lingered near the exit, her eyes full of venom. She might have lost this round, but I knew she'd regroup, lash out harder. I fired up my truck and pulled away, adrenaline coursing through me. This was more than a local feud. It was a statement. You can't bully people forever. The next step was forging alliances, building a network of supporters to ensure the board couldn't gloss over our evidence. Karen's empire was vast, but it wasn't indestructible. The next morning, Mr. Henderson showed up right after breakfast with another manila envelope. He looked tired yet determined. You need to see these, he said, pushing it toward me. Inside were more damning documents about Karen Reynolds, this time from her earliest days as HOA president. She had a pattern of picking off vulnerable landowners, citing property neglect, then offering to manage the land under the HOA until it somehow transformed into a communal development project. But once it was communal, she'd sell parcels to her connected developers. Sarah's hand gripped my shoulder. It's all here, Richard. This is the roadmap for every shady deal she's done. I flipped through photos of neglected lots, all eventually bulldozed. A creeping horror chilled me. This could have been us so easily, and in a sense, it already was. Mr. Henderson settled into a chair. You're the first person with enough backbone and proof to stand a chance against her. Thank you, I replied. We'll need all the help we can get. We spent hours organizing the evidence. Sarah scanned everything, uploading it to multiple cloud backups in case Karen or her cronies tried something. I remembered how her signature always appeared in that same, confident loop, a brand of ownership over others' property. Late in the afternoon, Sarah answered a cryptic phone call, someone claiming to have inside knowledge of the county council's collusion with Karen. It felt surreal, like we were in a detective novel, except our home and future were on the line. Outside, I noticed that same young woman from the other day wandering near our fence. She snapped photos, then hurried off when I opened the door. My gut twisted with suspicion. Was she working for Karen, or was she scared, trying to pass information? Mr. Henderson stood to leave. He gave me a long look, voice low. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories. As he stepped out, I saw another piece of paper slip from his jacket pocket, a cryptic note referencing old boundary disputes from decades ago. Another piece of the puzzle. I gathered up the day's findings. My mind buzzed with strategies and potential pitfalls. One thing was certain. We were no longer alone in this fight. Marcus spread 3 maps across the dining room table. Old, older, and ancient. Each documented property lines around Willowbrook differently. Tiny discrepancies showed where the HOA had expanded its reach through borderline legal maneuvers. These lines shouldn't have changed without owner's consent, Marcus said, tapping the middle map. It's subtle, but over decades, it accumulates into a huge land grab. Sarah refilled our coffees, eyes flicking between the maps and me. I thought back to Karen's sneer whenever she talked about inefficient land use. She acted like our farm was a relic that had to be modernized or removed. A ping sounded from Marcus's phone. He opened it, reading quickly. Local Historical Society found some key documents. They confirm your family's trust from the 1940s was never revoked. My breath caught. That means they built on land that can't be sold. Marcus nodded. Exactly. It felt like a lifeline. My grandfather's forward-thinking strategy was saving us from beyond the grave. He must have known men like Karen's father, or Karen herself would try to corner the farm. He wasn't just a farmer, he'd been a strategist all along. The hours wore on, and our living room transformed into a war room of legal references. The air smelled like old paper and coffee grounds. I found myself whispering thanks to my grandfather for his diligence. Each document was a shield, each typed line a rung to climb out of this mess. As dusk settled, Sarah brought down another dusty box from the attic. Inside lay more letters, some addressed to old county officials, referencing grants, inspections, and farmland protection laws. My eyes blurred from reading, but I pressed on. If I missed even one detail, Karen could slip through a loophole. By night's end, we had a game plan. We'd file an injunction to halt further construction on the hotel, then we'd present the trust documents and boundary discrepancies, effectively proving the HOA had no legal right to build there. A part of me felt a surge of triumph. They never expected a farmer to fight back, and fight smart. The next day, the local paper, the Willowbrook Herald, ran a front-page article, Family Challenges HOA over alleged land grab. They quoted me carefully, describing how the Holloway farm had been in our family for 4 generations. Karen's name appeared in the piece, but she refused to comment. Within hours, my phone began ringing off the hook. Reporters, neighbors, even people from other counties who said they'd been victimized by aggressive HOAs. Support and curiosity flowed in equal measure. Karen's retaliation arrived by afternoon, a cease and desist letter from the HOA's lawyers. It claimed we were spreading misinformation and tarnishing the community's reputation. My blood boiled, but Marcus just smirked. It's hollow. She's playing defense because you drew blood. A local TV reporter named Emily Rodriguez showed up outside the farm gates, requesting an on-camera interview. She stood against the backdrop of golden sunlight, the half-constructed hotel looming behind her. I took a deep breath, remembering every insult Karen had ever thrown our way. This is more than a land dispute, I told Emily. It's about family legacy and the right to protect what's ours. The camera blinked red, capturing every word. Karen and her bored cronies couldn't silence us now. The story was out, and people were paying attention. That evening, Sarah and I watched the segment on the local news. Footage of me speaking cut to stock images of farmland, then to the towering hotel. A sharp pang hit my gut, seeing that concrete monster overshadowing our fields. But the broadcast ended with a statement from an environmentalist group promising to investigate potential wetland or ecological violations. I glanced at Sarah. She nodded, a determined set to her jaw. If the HOA had harmed protected land, no paper trail could save them. Karen's empire might crumble faster than we'd anticipated. And crumble it did. Over the next week, we learned about potential wetland protections on a corner of our property, the exact spot where the hotel's foundation stood. Marcus showed me a geological survey, an almost invisible marker, that designated the area as an ecologically sensitive zone. That single dot changed everything. We have them, Marcus said, laying out a series of environmental regulations. If they built on protected land, the fines alone could bankrupt the project. My mind flashed to memories of trudging through that marshy patch as a kid, catching frogs and hearing my grandfather caution me not to damage the reeds. He knew. He must have recorded it somewhere. Images of the farmland flickered in my mind, a delicate ecosystem that thrived if left undisturbed. Karen, in her arrogance, hadn't just stolen land, she'd poisoned it. My grandfather's voice hissed in my memory. They starve the soil. They starve the soul. All for profit. Marcus made call law specialist. Documents traded hands. Each piece of evidence was another blow to the HOA's wall of legalities. The press wanted statements. Local officials suddenly distanced themselves from Karen, claiming they'd been misled. The momentum shifted in our favor. Sarah and I watched as neighbors rallied, signing petitions and sharing their stories of Karen's bullying. The HOA board grew divided. Some members quietly stepped forward, admitting they'd voted based on incomplete information Karen fed them. I felt a surge of vindication, but also sadness for how many lives she'd disrupted. Late one evening, we received an anonymous email containing aerial photos that confirmed the wetland area was far more extensive than any official HOA documents indicated. No one knew who sent it, but I suspected an insider fed up with Karen's manipulation. The truth has a way of surfacing when people have had enough. I remembered the day Karen stood on that same patch of land in her fancy heels, sinking into the mud. She had no respect for it, no understanding of what it meant. Well, the land would fight back now, with us as its... The day of the court hearing felt like stepping into a ring. I was David, facing Goliath in a crisp blazer and high heels. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, flanked by her legal team. Her calm facade was betrayed by the jittery tapping of her fingernails on the table. Judge Elizabeth Hartman presided, known for zero tolerance of shady dealings. Marcus started our argument strong, unveiling the property trust documents, genealogical records, and environmental surveys. The tension in the courtroom grew so thick I could taste it. Karen's lawyer tried to paint us as obstructionists, accusing me of impeding community progress. I clenched my jaw, thinking of the farmland that had fed my family for generations. Community progress. Right. More like personal profit. The judge turned to Karen, eyes narrowed. Why did your organization proceed with construction without a comprehensive environmental impact study? Karen responded in a carefully rehearsed tone. We followed all standard procedures. The property was technically... Marcus slid an email chain onto the evidence table, exposing how she bypassed official protocols. Judge Hartman's gaze sharpened. One of Karen's own board members took the stand, hands shaking. He confessed to internal disagreements, revealing that Karen coerced them into approvals by threatening fines and social ostracism. You could almost feel the air crackle with disbelief. An environmental expert testified about the wetland disruptions, potential fines, the damage to native species. Karen's face paled. The foundation of her empire cracked as each new piece of evidence struck. After hours of testimony, the judge's summation was damning. She lambasted the HOA for overreach and found the hotel project in violation of multiple regulations. She ordered construction halted, pending a full investigation. Karen's jaw set tight, but no argument could save her from the undeniable facts. We filed out into the hallway, neighbors offering quiet congratulations. Reporters peppered me with questions, cameras flashing. I looked back to see Karen trembling in barely contained fury, but for once, she had no snide comment. As I exited, a wave of relief washed over me. I thought of my grandfather's words, "Knowledge is your best weapon." He was right. We'd used every record, every scrap of information he'd preserved. We'd honored his legacy by protecting the land he cherished. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a stand against all bullies who think power can trump justice. Some weeks later, I walked the farm alone at sunrise, the dew on the grass glittering like tiny diamonds. Where the illegal hotel once loomed, only a stripped foundation remained, fenced off by court order. The hush felt like the land was breathing again. Marcus's calls brought more good news. Several city council members tied to Karen's activities had resigned under investigation for corruption. Karen herself faced potential legal consequences, from heavy fines to a lawsuit by the state's Environmental Commission. Her carefully curated alliances fell apart the moment scrutiny hit. Sarah joined me in the field, taking my hand. "We did it," she whispered, but we both knew the fight wasn't truly over. Karen had money and connections, and she'd appealed. Yet this time, we weren't alone. Community members had rallied, forming groups to protect local farmland and hold the HOA accountable. A spark had ignited, and it wouldn't die out soon. Standing there, I scooped up a handful of rich earth, letting it crumble through my fingers. For a moment I closed my eyes, imagining my grandfather's smile. He'd planned for this long before I was ever old enough to understand. We had won the initial battle. Our farmland was ours again, recognized and protected by law. But more than that, we'd forced the entire town to reckon with how easily one person's greed could manipulate an entire community. Neighbors who once refused to speak out now shared their own experiences of intimidation. The press moved on to broader stories about property rights and environmental stewardship, but the new wave of awareness lingered. On the horizon, a hawk soared, a silent guardian watching over our victory. I felt an unexpected calm. This land wasn't just ours legally, it was ours spiritually, bound by blood and history. Karen Reynolds could appeal and fight in every court available. Let her try. The evidence was stacked in our favor, and so was the community's support. We walked back toward the house. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Grandfather would be proud," she said quietly. I nodded, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. He was ready for a war he never had to fight, but I'm glad he left us the ammo. Over the next days, I coordinated with environmental groups to restore the damaged wetland sections. The local news picked up a follow-up story on how farmland owners could defend their rights. I did interviews, encouraging people to keep meticulous records, band together, and never underestimate the value of a single piece of paper. At night, when the wind rustled the fields and the stars shone overhead, I felt at peace. We had proven that no matter how powerful the bully, a determined family armed with knowledge could prevail. The soil under my feet no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a promise of new harvests and second chances. Karen Reynolds might still lurk in the shadows, nursing her wounded pride, but her reign of intimidation was broken. The Holloway farm stood defiant, living testament to the idea that legacy is more than land, it's the will to protect it. And if anyone ever again dared lay claim to what wasn't theirs, they'd discover the same truth Karen did. You don't mess with a Holloway.